sure, is everyone able to see the screen okay?
See if I'm on.
Thanks everyone for joining. We're using a slightly different version of WebEx, so hopefully that resolves the technical difficulties that we have been experiencing the past couple of months. Hope there wasn't any confusion in joining, and yeah, see if this one is actually agreeable to us. So webinar, sticking to the agenda presentations that everyone agreed to earlier on in the year, we're looking at using asset management practices for climate change mitigation and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. For that, Jade Schofield, the Environmental Sustainability Coordinator from the town of Ajax, has happily agreed to give today's presentation, and we'll be looking at the city's energy demand and conservation management plan. I met Jade a few years ago when I was serving in a fairly similar capacity with the City of Windsor, and was lucky to reconnect with her earlier this year. Following Jade's presentation, Adam from the City of Kenora will be giving his CAMN update. Kenora's been moving really quickly with their resilience study. They have their new strategic asset management plan adopted by council, which includes climate change chapter, and Adam speak more fully to that a little later on. So, want to welcome you again and invite you to give your presentation, especially with a new version of WebEx I'm not entirely familiar with. Easiest if when you're ready for the next slide to be advanced to, just give me a verbal cue and I'll advance it for you. To all of the attendees on the call, just as always, please mute your lines at the moment. After Jade's presentation, we'll have some time for question and answer, over which you can either relay the questions directly to me over the chat function or mute your line and ask verbally. So to you.
Perfect, very much. And please use the chat function if you have any issues with sound and volume coming from my end as well. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm really excited to give the town of Ajax aspect regarding using asset management processes for greenhouse gas reduction. If we could jump into the next slide. So to everyone on the line, a bit of background. The town of Ajax is located 25 kilometers east of Toronto. We are the very far eastern municipality that forms the Greater Toronto area. And we're situated along the shoreline of Lake Ontario, a population of 118,000. However, we are only 67 kilometers squared, so we're small. And a local municipality within a two-tier system, and we are within the region of Durham. In terms of community contacts, we are primarily suburban with a rapid population growth. Next slide. As of our climate mitigation work, everything really kicked off back in 2010 when the town of Ajax joined the ICLEI and Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partners for Climate Protection program. For those of you that aren't aware, this program is still running, and it consists of 5 milestones, and it really gets you started on reducing greenhouse gas emissions both corporately and within the community. The 5-milestone program consists of milestone 1. You actually conduct initial GHG emissions inventory, whether it be for your corporate or for your community, and it also includes a forecast, so you take into account things like growth projections and facility and asset add-ons. Milestone 2, you actually set a GHG reduction target. Milestone 3, you develop a local action plan. So this is your strategic document that highlights how you're going to actually meet those targets. Milestone 4, we actually went ahead and implemented the local action plan. Final milestone is actually going back and measuring your progress and reporting your results. And I am pleased to say that the town of Ajax has gone through all of the 5 milestones since 2011 when we initiated Milestone 1, and we'll continue our greenhouse gas mitigation work as a result of that. Next slide. Gas target settings, because we were fairly early adopter of the GHG PCP program, we did utilize the targets that were recommended by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So we set a corporate GHG reduction target of 20% by the year 2020, and using 2005 as the baseline year. For the year, in 2005, Ajax total corporate CO2 emissions was 6,300 tons. And then to meet that 20% reduction, we would need to reduce our emissions by 1,271 tons per year, with a total cap of 5,082 tons by the year 2020. Next slide. In order to do that, our corporate strategic plans were embedded into what's called our Integrated Community Sustainability Plan. This was developed back in 2013, and this is a very large, high-level strategic document that covers everything from social, economic, and environmental pillars of sustainability. So it covers everything from health, from waste to transportation issues. But there are a lot of actions within that plan that really related to asset management as well as kind of our energy and GHG management, specifically in the air pollution, energy, and transportation sectors. In addition to the Integrated Sustainability Plan, two appendices of this document were our local action plans, and that's where we pulled out all the actions related to greenhouse gas reductions for our corporate and community sectors, and highlighted what projects needed to be completed in order to meet those targets. And those projects were defined whether they were on the corporate side for facilities, fleet, lighting, and waste, as well as additional policy and educational initiatives. Next slide. In addition to our local action plans, back in 2009, the Green Energy Act of Ontario came out and mandated that municipalities in Ontario record and report their GHG emissions corporately each year to the Ministry of Environment. And in addition, we were also required to develop what is known as an Energy Conservation Demand Management Plan. This is a corporate document that sets targets and goals that allow us to reduce our overall corporate energy use as well as our GHG emissions, help us meet our GHG emission reduction targets. One thing required under the legislation is that we do have to consider future actions and strategies that will allow us to continue to conserve energy for the corporation. And in 2019, we'll mark the 5th year of the Energy Conservation Demand Management Plan coming into effect, and will require an update as well. Next slide. In terms of this plan structure, it's fairly typical of a strategic document. It has its vision and goals, has baseline energy consumption, and we mirrored the information that we used from our 2011 greenhouse gas inventory because we wanted to make sure our existing strategic documents aligned. And the areas of focus, we did include fleet, which was not a requirement under the legislation, but it was something that we had included in our previous local action plans, as well as our buildings, lighting, education, and awareness. With that plan, we were able to highlight projects that had been completed to date, so it really captured a lot of the work that the initial local action plans help us do. Identified our future projects, and also we had to lay out how we were going to implement and monitor the success of the plan. Next up. So we'll take a little bit step backwards now. So I've given you an overview of the strategic plans, but what I want to do is kind of highlight how we got to the specific actions in terms of developing our priorities in two of the sectors. So I'm going to go over building maintenance and fleet today. Next slide. Give you a little bit of background. Back in 2013, we hired a consultant to conduct a detailed facilities and condition assessment for 19 of our facilities. Now, I point out that we operate around 54 municipal facilities. We have 3 large community centers, an operations center, as well as 1 major municipal building. And we have a number of smaller buildings that are less frequently used, more small rental halls or washrooms or those types of buildings. 17 facilities underwent this conditions assessments are our big buildings that consume a large amount of energy and have a lot of specialized equipment. And these assessments were really crucial for providing us an in-depth analysis of the existing conditions and allowed us to develop a full facility capital equipment replacement project list that would be required in 2, 5, and 7 years from the time of assessment. So it's really on the mechanical and structure conditions and not necessarily focused on energy. But included in each of these reports were the proposed environmental measures as the deep cost analysis for the future energy conservation retrofit projects where they see fit. Next slide. So what we took those facility conditions assessments and we took it one step further. And 2014, we conducted facility energy audits. So again, our 8 major facilities, excluding our non-lead facilities, underwent an energy audit. And what these did was actually calculated the energy savings from the projects that had been identified within the facilities conditions list as related to energy. And able to look at past energy history and also create a forecast in terms of that business assessment for the proposed energy savings with that retrofit project. And what this allows us to do is really prioritize which projects would have the fastest payback and also as it relates to capital costs. So rather than picking the projects that needed to be done the fastest or picking the projects that are the cheapest and easiest to do, really we're able to do it on a business case basis. A number of these projects were what were extracted from energy audits and implemented into our energy conservation and demand management plan. Next slide. This is an excerpt from one of the overview of the facility energy audits, and you can see that energy can be illustrated in a number of ways. And in terms of gigajoules is a good way for the technical side, but from a political perspective, a lot of the times what we do is show how much money we can save through these projects. And Ajax Community Center, as you can see, is one of our largest facilities, and the potential for energy savings there are fairly substantial. And a lot of it is in the electrical sector. So upgrading some of the electrical equipment in our facility has the potential for some of the biggest dollars. So that helps us prioritize our capital budget and our limited resources as it relates to building maintenance reserves. Some of the smaller facilities may have smaller payback. But again, it helps us identify and prioritize those actions. Next slide. And into the energy savings, we were also able to highlight the greenhouse gas emission reductions. So again, when you're doing that political business case, sometimes dollars aren't always the best way to showcase some of those projects, also showing the environmental benefit as well, or vice versa. And again, you can really see the direct correlation between energy savings, cost savings, and the climate package as well. And this really gives that holistic view and helps you, again, further prioritize which projects will be completed and when. Right? So next, right now we operate on a 5-year capital budget forecast. The Energy Conservation Demand Management Plan, as a result of those facilities conditions assessments and the energy audits, we were able to identify 5 years in advance all the energy-based capital projects that need to be completed. And with that, we were able to calculate the GHG savings, the cost savings, and then therefore benchmark the newer technology that we are using for future projects in other facilities. You can see some of the costings here. These are the future ones that were included in the Energy Conservation Demand Management Plan, which of course will be updated in 2019. Next slide. And really, business case within your energy retrofits within facilities. One thing that is really important is to ensure that you can properly monitor energy consumption within your buildings. Next slide. So we've done a number of projects in order to help people understand how facilities operate, both from a political as well from a staff basis, and also start to really monitor and measure sections of buildings or equipment or programs taking place within a facility so that we can calculate the true cost of our operations. So one initiative we did with one of our lead facilities, it's a lead community center with a swimming pool and a gymnasium and some rental rooms, installed a Lucid dashboard. Now, this is a LEED credit certifiable monitoring system, and this is an online platform that is also available on display within the facility that measures occupancy at the time of the facility, and then also records real-time data in terms of energy use, water, green features, etc. So there is a link here in the presentation, and feel free to click that link and you can actually take a live look at that facility. And it is one of the ways that we have been monitoring some of our energy uses and also relaying that information to the public. Next slide. We also installed, we have started to install in our larger facilities better sub-metering processes. So that's been one of our biggest challenges, especially in our larger facilities that had add-ons made to them over the years, is that we're not able to really determine where or within a facility is consuming the most energy. It's kind of based on calculations on the equipment that's existing. How installing sub-metering really helps for you to track that distribution of energy within each facility. Right now we have electrical sub-metering within our Ajax Community Center. We just installed that. And our Audley Recreation Center, which is our lead silver facility, we have sub-metering for electrical, natural gas, and water distribution. Sub-metering is crucial for us to support operational decisions as well as the capital investments to help improve energy performance, and also allows people that may not be as energy or technically focused in this area to have a better understanding of how these facilities operate as a result of the types of programs we're running in them. Next slide. So into the sub-metering, we have completed a number of projects, and I apologize for the small text, but there are just too many to list. But we've done everything from chiller retrofits to pool lighting to full engine room refits, roofing, solar projects as a result of our energy conservation demand management plan. Next slide. We also have installed a number of renewable energy projects. We have photovoltaic solar on 2 of our facilities, and we also have grid-connected geothermal in 2 of our facilities as well. And we have passive thermal solar in 2 of our facilities. So we've had great success. Our first renewable project was actually installed back in 2010, and we're still continuing to install solar in our facilities despite here in Ontario the removal of the FIT program, which was our financial incentive program. But we are also seeing from an asset management perspective that it's having a significant reduction on the facility's energy usage, and of course the public appeal of this type of equipment on our facilities is also fairly substantial. Next slide. That's kind of a brief overview of some of the work we've done from a building maintenance perspective, but we've also done a fair bit in fleet as well. Next slide. Background, our fleet inventory is currently 201 vehicles and 59 pieces of equipment. We do have everything you can think of, ranging from fire trucks to a string trimmer to garbage trucks, but I should point out we do not do drinking water services, garbage collection, or any EMS services here in Ajax. It's all at the regional level. In terms of the fuel usage, the majority of our vehicles use gasoline or diesel, with the exception of a couple of our Zambonis, which are still run on propane. Next slide. So all of our vehicles, we do have a Petrovan fuel tracking system, and this allows us really to conduct those GHG inventories and really any asset analysis that we do. This is our first source of data that we go to. So Petrovan records the amount of fuel that we're filling up. So all of our fuel is vehicles are fueled here at the operations center. We don't use any private gas stations. And the system allows us to track fuel by the type of vehicle, the specific driver, and the department. So this is really helpful for us to conduct those GHG inventories. And each year I have the great pleasure of downloading the spreadsheet of every fuel fill-up that we've done and actually going through all of our vehicles and trying to determine our fuel efficiency. The reason being is you'll find that depending on the use of the vehicle, It could be a pickup truck that's used for our bylaw services, or it could be a pickup truck that's used for snow removal. If they're the same truck, their fuel efficiency is going to be different just based on the usage, and therefore their lifespan could be impacted by that as well. And with mileage, so typically we'd put an asset length of time on a vehicle. For example, a sedan car would be a 7-year asset. How we do find, depending on where those vehicles have been allocated within the organization, some vehicles are driven a lot more than others, and therefore their lifespans could actually fluctuate as a result of that. And this fuel use tracking is really helpful to help kind of allow us to evenly distribute our fleet within the organization so that we can really maximize the lifespan out of these vehicles and reduce maintenance. Next slide. In addition to fuel use, our vehicles are also installed with a GPS tracking device. So we currently use Fleet Freedom, and it's really good because it allows us to do route tracking. So we can really, well, first of all, it allows us to calibrate fuel fill-ups with the actual driving miles of those vehicles. We get things like route optimization. So we do a park schedule, snow plow routes, like look at ways that we actually reduce the mileage that these vehicles take, ensure that we're still delivering the services that those vehicles are required to deliver. And then we can also, which is not the staff's favorite, but of course monitoring driver behavior. So things like speeding and idling, things can also help along our assets within our fleet, and also have fairly significant GHG reductions as well. Next slide. I do want to point out that fleet is actually the only corporate sector that has seen an increase in GHG emissions since we did our original inventory. And as a result of fleet growth, is the major reason is that we've actually seen a growth of 159 tons of CO2 since 2005. However, we have added 31 assets that utilize gasoline and diesel, and we also added a number of roads and parks to our system. So the vehicles are being required to travel further and do a lot more. Next. As a result, fleet is really going to become a priority within our update of our energy conservation demand management plan. One thing we're looking at is our original Green Fleet Initiative, which was designed to assist with the transition of vehicles towards more environmentally friendly options. For example, looking at things like hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, really focusing a little bit more on right-sizing of fleet. We've already done a number of initiatives where we have reduced the number of pickups on our fleet and replaced them with sedans where they are needed, but we know we've got a long ways to go to make perfect. And we also have an anti-idling campaign as well. Next. And we actually look at our fleet replacements. One thing we do is the emission standards, of course, is first and foremost. So although we are able to put a tender out on the street for specific vehicle makes and models, we are able to look at emission standards and request those that are higher than those that have typically been used in the past. Smaller vehicles, as mentioned, that right sizing of fleet, moving away from everyone being allocated a pickup truck. They really need them if they're hopping curbs or plowing roads, and making sure that kind of communication across the corporation is kind of relayed. Still continuing to looking at alternative fuels. So right now, electric is our main focus. But, we have looked into things like biodiesel and potentially even in the long run biogas. Allocation of vehicles. So with the fleet system is actually again looking to make the fleet vehicle within other departments not actually their asset, but making it a corporate asset. So we can shuffle those vehicles. Our fleet department can shuffle vehicles as they see fit. Again, going back to that, you could have two vehicles of the same. One may do 800 kilometers in a year. The other could do 80,000 kilometers in a year. It's making sure we're kind of really maximizing the mileage out of those vehicles. Increasing policies, so things like charging policies, looking at idling policies, just increased safety and awareness and defensive driving, training, things like that, all can have a fairly large impact on both the greenhouse gas emission reduction through saving fuel, but of course prolong the length of which our assets remain within our inventories. And now, in terms of asset, is we are adding EV charging infrastructure. So that is new equipment that is coming into our fleet that we need to consider the lifespan and evaluation of as well. Next slide. A number of challenges with fleet, and I think that has been shown through our PCP process, is that data analysis can be really challenging because you're relying on large amounts of data and large amounts of users inputting that data through the fuel tracking, through GPS tracking. And there isn't really an overly user-friendly method right now that allows you to just do that forward fuel emissions calculations or that GHG analysis. You really have to go through that data with a fine-tooth comb. I think is available technology. So we have seen that electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles have a longer asset management time, but we also know that we can't replace, our 5-ton dump trucks with an electric vehicle at this time just because the technology isn't available. Also the conditions in which we have to operate in. So that's something we're kind of still waiting for. And we feel like we're a fairly advanced municipality. We do try a number of vehicles. We were the first to have plug-in electric vehicles on our fleet in our region. We were first to purchase some of the off-road electric club cars back in 2008. So these are things that we continue to do, but of course we also have to remind that we're a public entity and we need to make sure we do our business cases before we make these purchases, especially with new technology. Mentioned growth is definitely a challenge. And one thing we've also noticed is just the demand from our clients, the community, is the increased service level. So especially relates to things like snow plowing, snow removal, garbage pickup. There is a requirement now for us to be out there more frequently. And so that has an impact on our assets in terms of the amount of use and, of course, our fuel usage. Slide?
They put the audio on. They didn't put the audio on this. Leave it.
To who is speaking? Do you mind just muting your line? Jade?
Okay. In terms of asset management considerations for green fleet replacement, again, I mentioned we are finding that we've taken some of the electric vehicles within our fleet. Our first hybrid vehicle we purchased back in 2007, and I am pleased to say they are still on our fleet despite them having a 7-year lifespan. These are the Honda Civics right here. They're not pretty as they used to be, but they still work, and from a maintenance perspective, our mechanics really do love them. And not that I'm endorsing a specific make or model, we are finding that from taking the hybrids, that there are longer warranties available. Plug-in electrics in Ontario have a typical warranty of 8 years. Less maintenance, the braking system, the exhaust system, everything like that is fairly regular changes for our maintenance staff, our fleet maintenance staff. They're not seeing that they have to do that as much. And of course, there's the obvious, there's the reduced operating costs because they are more fuel efficient. We're also finding they have reduced insurance costs, which is something that everyone is aware of, but because there's less electric vehicles and plug-in electric vehicles on the road. Then there's the extended lifespan of the vehicle. So again, as mentioned, those Honda Civics purchased in 2007, we're in 2018, and they're still on the road and functioning as they were when they purchased. So we've been very pleased with those. And now we have also purchased a number of plug-in hybrid vehicles, and we're seeing the same types of from these vehicles on our fleet as well. Next slide. Projects that we have completed within our organization as it relates to fleet is downsizing. As mentioned, back when our Green Fleet Plan first came out, all of our bylaw officers drove pickup trucks. Now they only have one van on their truck, and it's used for animal services. They drive the plug-in electric hybrids. They love them. They're more luxurious than the pickup trucks. It did take them a little while to be convinced before we purchased them, but now all of our staff are driving the sedans. Building inspectors as well within our planning department, again, all used to drive pickup trucks. It was determined that even though they are often on development sites, they are not required to do things like hop curbs or off roads. So again, those cars are meeting that service requirement. And then in our operations department, again, they were all driving having crew cab pickup trucks, and we've reduced a number of their vehicles down to sedans as well. In the downsizing, again mentioned, we've got plug-in hybrid vehicles, so we now have 8 on our fleet. We are hoping to purchase an SUV in 2019. And so I always hear from other municipalities is, oh, what do you do with plug-in hybrids in terms of charging infrastructure? First and foremost, municipalities don't operate 24 hours a day, their entire fleet 24 hours a day. Vans that are usually used for things like building inspectors on Monday to Friday through business hours, so these vehicles can be plugged in overnight, and that means they only require a regular plug socket. So what we have done is installed a line of level 1 chargers next to where our snow plows are plugged in overnight in the winter, and our plug-in hybrid electrics are plugged in at night. They don't require any specialized equipment, but what we've also done now, and in the process of completing by spring of 2019, is we've installed level 2 chargers for public and staff and fleet use at our major community centers. If any of those vehicles do need a major top-up, they can go to those facilities to do so in a shorter amount of time. Next slide. So I'm pleased to say that we have met our greenhouse gas emission targets that we set back based on the 2005 inventory, and we met these targets 5 years ahead of schedule. These reductions were as a result of the work we did within our buildings sector. Again, fleet was the only area where we did see growth. We did have a little bit of a helping hand in Ontario as a result of the phasing out of coal for electric generation back in 2012. But as you can see there, our absolute emissions met that target, and then if we actually remove the growth factor, we've added about 4 facilities and those fleet assets to our corporate assets, and we still have seen a reduction in those emissions. So we're pleased. However, that being said, we're not done, and we still have a long way to go on the climate case. Next slide. Plan to do 2008 at the end of this year. We are going to go back and actually redo our facility energy audits to go, now that we've kind of completed a lot of the low-hanging fruit in terms of the business cases, go back through and see what else we can do. Also in the process of developing a new green fleet strategy. We'll update our greenhouse gas targets in 2019, and that will be right before our provincial requirement for a new energy conservation demand management plan is completed, which will be in June 2019. Next slide. I also want to point out that Ajax isn't just using asset management to help with its climate mitigation things. We're also doing a lot of work on the climate adaptation side. And one thing we're doing right now as a result of the Municipal Climate Innovation Program through SCM, we have completed some fairly extensive vulnerability assessments looking at not just our corporate assets, but looking at community assets. So it could be things like our electricity grid, it could be green space. Looking at how climate change is going to impact the lifespan of the assets within the community. And it's going to be modeled using GIS technology, and hopefully help us to prioritize what infrastructure replacements and upgrades will be required from a technical perspective as a result of those climate changes coming our way. And the model outcomes will not only feed into our community climate adaptation plan, which is scheduled for completion in March of 2019, but it will also feed into the vulnerability assessment of our asset management plan, which is due in 2021. So that's it from me. If we flip to the slide, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Feel free to take down my information and send me an email. If I'm not the person, I'm not the fleet person, I'm not the building maintenance person or the asset management person to say that, but I can certainly help direct any information to the people should you require it. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thanks, Jade. The informative presentation, and particularly how well integrated that green fleet policy has become in the city. I know in other municipalities it can act as a bit of a guideline, but getting translating intention to action can be difficult. We do have a few questions. The first for other Ontario municipalities particularly. Do you know if offhand whether the recent repeal of the Green Energy Act is going to influence at all your requirement for an updated demand management plan, and if that requirement is no longer in existence, is that going to influence Ajax plans at all?
Great question, and I had this conversation with my boss yesterday, and it was determined, regardless as to whether the Green Energy Act continues to be in effect, we will be conducting an energy conservation demand management plan for 2019, just because we feel it helps us from a budgeting perspective, and it helps us so much from an asset perspective to have that plan in our hands. We will have a look more to integrate the local action planning side and the energy management plan into one, rather than having two separate strategic documents, because we felt that they were both very similar. Just the way that the information was portrayed was based on different business cases, the climate case versus maybe the energy/economic case.
Makes sense. Here's a question about the growth factor that Ajax used to compare greenhouse gas emissions between 2005 and the present. Can you articulate how the growth factor was calculated? Does it consider population, or increase in square footage, or service delivery, etc.?
Yeah, question. And it's for the corporate local action plan. For the corporate inventories, growth factor was calculated based on the sector. So for facilities, it was based on number of facilities by type and square footage. So we added on two fairly significant community centers into that area. So that was where you see a lot of the growth. For fleet, it was based on the kilometers driven, as well as a number of assets included. So that's how we did the calculations for those. Streets was based on number of units, because that'd be a fairly straightforward one for growth. And waste as well was based on square footage of facilities.
Okay. And besides what you noted around particular staff hesitancy, were there any challenges to updating the procurement principles to integrate those emission standards? And how has the market responded to that updated requirement?
Again, I'm speaking on behalf of our fleet team. I'm aware we have a very good relationship with our procurement department, and as long as we are following bylaws and procedures, they are very forgiving. They actually developed our green procurement policy. It wasn't actually driven from the sustainability section here in Ajax. With market response, that has been challenging in some sense, where we were kind of speccing out a vehicle hoping that we'd get a specific make and model, but of course availability has really been a challenge. At least it was 3-4 years ago. However, in recent years, we are finding that there are certain dealers out there that are waiting for tenders to come out, and they have those vehicles already sat on the lots ready for us to purchase. Some of the challenges has been, again, the pickup is challenging because there was one vehicle for a little while that had very low emissions and was a diesel vehicle, and able to specify that we wanted those emissions because there really was only one make and model out there, and we can't be seen to be sole sourcing. But over the last 1 to 2 years, we have seen such a huge influx of fuel-efficient vehicles on the market that we have a lot more choice, which has made it a lot easier to make those purchases.
Okay. And it'll be a little difficult unless you work really closely with the building department, but do you have an idea of how closely the modeled energy reductions estimated during the audit held up against the reality following the application of those actions?
Good question, and one that we are struggling to truly answer. Until we really have full sub-metering in all of our facilities, we really are not able to cross-compare. So Really, those energy audits are based on the types of equipment that are in there, the age of the equipment. It is very tricky to monitor sometimes the usage, occupancy, things like that, especially within some of our larger facilities. So it is an estimation to the best of our available knowledge, but as we implement some metering, we'll definitely have a better idea as to whether those energy audits are correlating with actual energy use.
Okay, just want to give one more opportunity if anyone has any questions. You can either send them through the chat function or unmute your phone and ask directly. I think we're good for if any questions come to anyone later on, you can see Jade's email there, and I'm sure she'd be happy to respond. Jade, just want to thank you again for the presentation. Really appreciate it. We'll be moving on to an update on some of the resiliency work that the City of Kenora has been doing. So, the two questions just came through. The webinar is being recorded, and I plan on uploading it to the PCP Hub. And okay, I think it's very small. Mechanism or framework do you use to feed information regarding greenhouse gas emissions? Do you use climate change adaptation, energy costs into your asset management plan to help prioritize capital investment?
It's definitely something we in the past, as it relates to building maintenance and fleet, it really has been based on the capital, the dollar business case as it relates to energy savings. However, moving forward with our climate adaptation work, we will be looking at how we can better integrate climate adaptation priorities into that asset management, knowing that it isn't just age and energy use that causes infrastructure to fail. We know that exposure to certain conditions also has an impact. So that's something that really will be completed in March of 2019.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jade. I'm going to invite Adam to unmute his line now and progress with the update on his CAMN progress and the overall resiliency progress that the City of Kenora is making.
Yeah, thanks. I figured I'd give a presentation here on the couple of the stages that we've completed thus far in the Climate Asset Management Network program through phase 1, and now we're just kind of knee-deep in terms of phase 2. Let's give a little bit of background. So Kenora there is, it's about 15,000 people, and we're located in northwestern Ontario near the Manitoba border. Based on the Canadian Shield in proximity to quite a few lakes, we have about 19 vehicle bridges and about 65 lift stations. So that kind of, from an asset management perspective, makes it quite unique. We carry about a $528 million asset portfolio, which for a community this size is quite a bit. As well as with the bridge, culvert, as well, and water services classes being kind of the largest share of our portfolio as well. Slide. Specifically, in terms of moving forward under this program, really the motivation came from our strategic plan, which was created in 2014. And we made the commitment that we'd consider the impacts of climate change in both rehabilitating existing and designing future infrastructure requirements, as well as work to mitigate the impacts of climate change in relation to city operations. For our official plan, which was redeveloped in 2015, we have, under our general development policies, we have an enabling framework for the preparation of adaptation strategies, as well as to assist in the coping of the effects of climate change in the community. The first step, I think, in realizing the goals of these planning documents came kind of late into actually when the strategic plan and OP came in place, but was back in 2017 where we hosted a community climate change workshop through the support of ICLEI's Train the Trainer program. And through this session, we gathered a different variety of different stakeholders from industry, the nonprofit sector, as well as the public sector to carry out vulnerability and risk assessments according to a series of impact statements. And so unsurprisingly, the core municipal assets were all rated high in both risk and vulnerability exercises. Thus, we see this as an important catalyst in moving forward under FCM's Climate Asset Management Network program. As well as, I think the timing really worked out great in terms of our own obligation to meet the Ontario Reg 588. We're doing some redeveloping the asset management plan to comply with that. And with this program coming up, we were able to kind of use the opportunity to really get all the work we needed done for next short term get it done around the same time. Just go to the next slide. Proceeding with phase one, we recognize there was not enough information around the climate implications for Kenora's infrastructure to inform policy development. That's not only related to council, but staff as well. The first step in this phase would complete a background study to inform the subsequent policy changes. As stated earlier, Kenora's distinct geography has in turn led to a distinct asset portfolio that is largely shaped by water services and bridges and culverts. In turn, a significant portion of the report focuses on projected climate impacts on these assets. And business case is further strengthened by linkages drawn between Kenora's economy, environment, and asset management. So what we really wanted to do with under this program is kind of further strengthen the case as asset management is something that not really confined to one individual in the corporation or one department, but really seen at as a way to foster community development and to be a really multifaceted or multidisciplinary type of program. But that being said, I mean, the primary use of the background study was to allow for updates to our strategic asset management policy, the new proposed committee structure, and our asset and ultimately the asset management plan itself. So at the conclusion of phase one, which was completed by June, we have a new strategic asset management policy and steering committee. So once again, this ensures that any development is not just viewed as something that is confined to one person, but really an interdepartmental responsibility, and that projected climate impacts are actively discussed throughout. And obviously, where the ANP was really housed was within one person in our finance department who would be responsible with coordinating with the consultant as well as our operational staff to collect the necessary data. And then shortly after, or at least just I think it was in beginning or early of 2018, this individual left and kind of left the program in a little bit of limbo. So, I mean, my background is not exactly asset management planning, but through this program, I've been trying to move it forward in terms of something that's a little bit more committee-based or interdepartmental, so we can. Doesn't matter if one person leaves, where there's somebody or a group there to pick up the ball on it. And then in terms of the asset management plan itself, the linkages to the adaptation and resilience study has highlighted specific vulnerabilities facing a number of asset classes and enables us to move forward in adjusting formulas in phase two to account for climate change. To move forward on phase two, the development of a proper climate change risk management for the city requires both internal and external data sources to be gathered. And this will be done, or is being done, by assessing internal policy documents, raw data, other internal information sources related to infrastructure and climate change. It's because of internal staff interviews and other internal knowledge gathering to help develop this type of risk framework. And then we've already completed a series of these staff interviews via teleconference with our consultant last month, and this was just among our public works department. And actually, based on some of the initial feedback, it's been fairly interesting that specific vulnerabilities have included our gravel roads in rural areas, in which washouts often take a considerable amount of time to be fixed, and that, and really, if there's an extreme weather event, and perhaps what's kind of unique for our area relative to some others is that really it's still when beaver dams collapse, that's what often will lead to serious washouts in those areas. And even though they may impact only a few houses or whatnot, we still have to kind of factor that into how we assess risk in terms of planning our assets. Next step in our program will be on-site workshops, and then from this, the data will be scrubbed of anything irrelevant, as well as we'll work towards the creation of a full risk framework for the city. From here, you just see how we'll be modifying the existing risk models for our large infrastructure asset classes to include climate stress parameters and their potential impacts. Right now, we're using the industry standard of risk equals probability of failure times consequence of failure, but we'll need to modify that to integrate the four major factors of climate change. We're looking at exposure, volatility, resilience, and adaptation. If you want to just go to the next slide. From the screenshot here, you see how that is currently what our climate stress, our risk parameters are currently defined, and you see the weighting attached to at least, or how weighting can be assigned. And so as part of phase 2, we'll be reviewing this existing attribute data and identifying additional risk indicators and weighting based on a climate change lens. So we'll involve extensive research into how individual assets will be affected by environmental impacts of climate change. From an asset characteristic perspective, it's important to know how different materials, designs, and technologies impact the consequence and probability of failure. And much of the information from forming the framework will be ascertained in the risk framework data collection phase. As you can see from just once again another kind of screenshot or piece from our current asset management plan, this is what our risk matrix looks without, at least for one portfolio, what it looks like without climate impacts considered. And what we're hoping to do after this framework is developed is really be able to compare how it does change based on the inclusion of climate parameters, and how does that really kind of affect our decision making. And that's where the final, or well, phase 3, phase 2 almost, in terms of the development of climate capital prioritization policy comes in place. So risk impacts every stage of the asset management decision-making process, from establishment of organizational objectives to planning of operations and maintenance activities, and the delivery of these services to the community. But what we're hoping to do is really make sure that this is not something, or a risk framework that's as part of our asset management plan isn't left isolated from the capital planning process, because otherwise it just has limited value in terms of how our plan will be implemented. And it's important to develop a capitalization process that best reflects the costs associated with standard depreciation, life cycle costs, and economic risk of failure for infrastructure, along with the costing for current and climate risks. So the final deliverable here with the capital prioritization policy will be based on the risk frameworks and the information gathered from all the different interviews and workshops that have been completed. And then in doing so, we're hoping to really develop a guide for to help create that business case, or to help really show council how we can sustainably use municipal investments. And then slide. In terms of timelines, our on-site workshops that we're planning on rolling out will be looking at late October, in the 25th and 26th. and then being the first day being dedicated to these risk assessments with in the morning, then later in the afternoon, really getting some of the more corporate administration staff involved in terms of fleshing out this capital prioritization policy. And then day two, we'll be looking at just our some asset management systems training with our citywide software and really being able to make sure that we can know how to handle the new attribute data, or at least move forward in terms of implementing our action plan following. So, but yeah, that's really the kind of the update that I just had for the group in terms of our project, and could at least attempt to answer any of the questions that the group may want to provide.
Coming from an experience of working with municipalities mostly in southwestern Ontario and personal experience, can't say I've had too much exposure to the risk posed by breaking beaver dams. So
yeah,
that was an interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
Bit risk framework you had, where you had the number of assets and the value of them noted in each kind of risk cell. Right to understand that at the outset of this program, you already had a pretty good developed inventory of your assets, including the valuation of them.
No, I think really, I mean, in terms of our linear assets, I mean, we're pretty well along in terms of having condition data attached to that and knowing where we're at. Actually, we were able to acquire funding through the municipal asset management program for to further our the data available under our road network and just moving forward under a street scan system. But I mean, really, where we're starting, I think, and actually what probably the previous presentation really with is in terms of getting some facility condition data. I think that's the next step in improving our underlying inventory. And now we really don't we have any condition data pertaining to that. And that's why the focus for under phase 2 is more so our linear assets at this time.
Have a question. Is this work being done in-house or with in-house resources, or using external help?
Yeah, we've been using external help for pretty much throughout. I mean, phase 1, beyond the background study, it was probably so in-house led, just with the inclusion of some of the climate variables as part of the plan and the strategic asset management policy. But definitely phase 2 is very heavy in being consultant led, and yeah, they've been very good in terms of helping us.
Good. I just want to give. Would it be possible to share the risk matrix that you're using?
Certainly, I can. It's all ingrained as part of our plan, so I can circulate that out previous or after this call.
Okay. If you wanted to send it to me, I could upload it to the PCP Hub, or you could do so yourself.
Yep. Yep.
Seeing any other indications that anyone's writing a question. So, yeah, very much, Adam. Next month, we have our last scheduled webinar for the Climate and Asset Management Network. I'm currently trying to line up a speaker for climate risk valuation, bit of a niche area of expertise, so consulting a little more actively in the academic community to find someone who's able to speak to that. And for our CAMN updates, Amy from the City of Glen Bay and Chris from the City of Yellowknife have agreed to share. Sorry about the previous indication that Chris was due to speaking this webinar. That was a mistake on my part. But yeah, otherwise, thanks very much, everyone, for joining, and it looks like you have about half an hour back in your day. So, in the last days of September. Good one, everyone.
Okay.